WPLN.org is where you can find more from WPLN News, including the Nash Villager, your human-powered newsletter and podcast, exploring Nashville news and history. Subscribe to both at WPLN.org.
From Nashville Public Radio, I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. It's our weekly Roundabout, where we take a moment to think about the news. Our panel spans the political spectrum, including former Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives, Beth Harwell, former congressional candidate Kiran Sreepada and TSU political science professor Ian Shapiro are also back, and Nina Cardona is in guest hosting. An industrial explosion leaves 16 dead. Federal authorities double their presence in Memphis. More primary opponents for Republicans in Congress, plus a few smile stories and your calls after the news. This is Nashville.
Sharing news and stories from the voices of Middle Tennessee. This is Nashville. Our show is made possible by Music City Prep Clinic. This is Nashville is in service to you. So if you have an idea for the show or feedback you'd like us to hear, leave us a voice message at 615-751-2500.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The Republican-led U.S. Senate did not get enough votes to advance legislation to reopen the government. NPR's Barbara Sprent reports it's the 10th time a vote like this has failed.
The 51-45 vote fell short of the 60 votes needed to move forward. Senate Republicans need a handful of Democrats to join them in order to advance the bill. 2 Democrats and 1 independent senator have repeatedly voted alongside Republicans. No new Democrats have joined them since that first vote. As the stalemate continues, Senate Democrats insist Republicans have to negotiate with them in order to get their votes, specifically on the soon-to-expire Affordable Care Act subsidies. Republicans say reopen the government first, negotiate after. Because the Senate doesn't plan to be in legislative session until Monday, it's expected that the funding lapse and negotiation impasse will hit the 3-week mark next week. Barbara Sprent, NPR News, the Capitol.
Political map makers and voting rights advocates are watching to see when the U.S. Supreme Court will rule in a case that will shape the future of redistricting. Here's NPR's Hansi Lo-Wang.
For this Louisiana redistricting case, it's not clear if the Supreme Court will break from its usual schedule of releasing major decisions in June. Louisiana officials have asked for a ruling by early January. Alana Odoms leads the American Civil Liberties Union of Louisiana, which is representing a group of black voters in this case, and says whenever the court rules, it would determine whether the Voting Rights Act Section 2 could continue to protect against the dilution of racial minority voters' collective power in places where voting is racially polarized.
If Section 2 falls, legislatures could redraw maps whenever it helps them keep power, and communities of color could pay the price or would pay the price.
Depending on how the court rules, Republicans could redraw up to 19 more congressional districts in their favor. Hansi Lo-Wang, NPR News.
The UN humanitarian chief says there's been a setback in the amount of aid going to Gaza during the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. More from NPR's Aya Batrawi.
The UN says its teams in the past 24 hours were only able to collect aid, such as food, medicine, and hygiene kits that had previously been transferred into Gaza. That means the UN wasn't able to bring in new aid since at least Tuesday. The UN says a flood of aid is desperately needed in Gaza to reverse starvation and severe malnutrition, particularly among children. The UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher says thousands of trucks of aid should be flowing into Gaza every week, and that all land crossings into Gaza must be open. He says the UN has long insisted that withholding aid from civilians in Gaza is not a bargaining chip. Israel's military has not responded to NPR's request for comment. Fletcher also called on Hamas to make strenuous efforts to return all bodies of hostages. Aya Batrawi, NPR News, Dubai.
U.S. stocks trading lower this hour, with the Dow down 173 points, the S&P has lost 28, and the Nasdaq is now off 68 points. From Washington, this is NPR News. President Trump said on social media this morning he had a lengthy conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but didn't give specifics. Trump's preparing to welcome back Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. Days after securing a ceasefire deal in the Middle East, President Trump is attempting to achieve the same between Russia and Ukraine. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents in Chicago are now under court order to wear body cameras. Today, U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis rendered her decision after expressing concern that agents were failing to comply with an earlier order to avoid using violent measures against peaceful protesters and journalists. The judge says she was a little startled by televised images of clashes between agents and protesters against ICE's heightened presence on Chicago's streets. Scholars and fans came from as far away as France for an academic symposium on Bruce Springsteen's album, Born to Run. NPR's Frank Langford explains.
Donna Love is an educator at Boston Children's Hospital. She spoke about a book she co-wrote on Springsteen's particular bond with female fans. She said Springsteen's song Thunder Road inspired her when she was growing up in England.
I identified with the feeling of desperately trying to get out. I feel like that really changed my life.
How did it change your life?
I think it allowed me to dream bigger.
The Springsteen Archive sponsored the symposium. The archives contains everything from the notebooks in which Springsteen wrote his songs to oral histories from the E Street Band. The archives opens next year in a new $50 million building on the Monmouth campus. Frank Langford, NPR News, West Long Branch, New Jersey.
It's NPR.
Support for NPR comes from ARM, committed to delivering innovative, advanced computing designed to enable worldwide companies to unleash the capabilities and experiences of AI. The future of AI is built on ARM. ARM.com. This is NPR.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, working to help donors make more possible through the power of community giving. More at cfmt.org.
I'm Nina Cardona, and this is Nashville. Each week, this show takes a moment to sit with the stories that need some time, and our panel helps us think about the news. It's also your time to chime in with your thoughts on the big stories of the week. Our panel helping us digest the news includes former House Speaker Beth Harwell, who served 30 years in the Tennessee legislature. She's also a former board member of the Tennessee Valley Authority. Welcome to This is Nashville.
Good to be with you.
Returning to the panel are Kiran Sreepada, a former congressional candidate in the 5th District and former director for the States Project, and Ian Shapiro, a political science professor at Tennessee State University who specializes in political psychology. And welcome back to both of you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
As a reminder, we're streaming video at youtube.com/@WPLN. You can join the conversation in the chat on the video stream or call to join the conversation at 615-760-2000. Well, we still have so many questions about what happened in Bucksnort last Friday. But what we know at this point is that 16 people were killed in a blast at a factory that processes explosives. The names for most of the victims have now been released, but we haven't learned much from investigators who say they are moving at a snail's pace to get the investigation right and to bring closure to the families. Beth, what role is there for state government in a situation like this?
Well, certainly to be as supportive and helpful of the local investigation as it's taking place. It's truly a tragedy. And, getting to the bottom of it is so critical. So, yes, I think state government, any way they can lend a helping hand, they would gladly do so.
Do you expect any kind of state support for the families?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the private company is willing to do. And certainly we want to be there. And I think you'll see a lot of charities step forward, too.
Right. Kiran, we don't know what caused this explosion. They haven't even ruled out foul play at this point. But do you expect the state would consider new regulations to protect against something like this happening again in the future?
I would hope so, but to be honest, I'm not super optimistic about that. Without knowing, as you said, we're very early in the stage, so without knowing what caused it, if there was a regulatory issue, I think I read somewhere about previous issues at this same plant and whether they were fixed or not, or I think there was some sort of settlement that was negotiated. Is that something that played a role? These are all great questions, but I don't think that if it comes to the point where it's a regulatory issue that we're going to see a lot of movement here, at least based on the history in the last few years on regulation in this state.
This plant was an interesting case because they had 8 buildings we don't know exactly what happened in that particular building, but we do know that everything they did dealt with explosives. Everything they touched, whether it was in research and development or in the manufacture, everything was a chain reaction waiting to happen if anything were to go wrong, whether it was an accident or foul play. And it is a military contractor. They have a lot of contracts to make devices for the U.S. military. Ian, are you surprised we haven't seen President Trump weigh in on this incident, which may be the most deadly industrial explosion in the 21st century?
I'm not entirely surprised. I've actually been very impressed by the general media orientation towards this story. A lot of times when there are tragedies and people want explanations and fast, that creates a pocket for conspiracies and all kind of ideation that can be damaging both to the investigation and to the community involved. And when I looked at stories and took a survey of them, I mean, I saw a focus on the community, and what you learned with this was a tight-knit community with a strong sense of belonging. When they tried to get information on any particular victim, they could find it from coworkers, places of worship, their family. Everybody wanted to talk about how much love they had for each individual who was involved.
I mean, given that this is a government contractor as well, I mean, would you expect to see more of a response from the federal government that is one of their customers? I mean, Beth, are you surprised at all?
Well, I think it's early on, so I don't think we know really what is going to happen.
Right.
So it's a little hard to say something right now. I do think that there is long-term consequences of this because you take these small little communities. This is probably the biggest, if not probably the biggest employer in that area. So there'll be long-term repercussions here. And I think all of us need to be behind the community.
Have you joined the vigils in Bucksnort? What do you make of the company's response? You can join us on air at 615-760-2000 or leave your comments in the chat at youtube.com/@WPLN, where we're streaming video. Let's turn our attention to Memphis now. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee says there is no set timeline for the surge in federal and state law enforcement in Memphis to end. He told reporters this week that the goal of the Memphis Safe Task Force is reducing violent crime, but he did not share specific targets. In some ways, Lee says the operation will last forever. However, he does expect the number of officers will eventually diminish. Lee called the numbers so far encouraging. He said the task force had made about 850 arrests, although nearly half are charges related to outstanding warrants or administrative immigration charges. In all, the task force has written 4,000 traffic citations. And one of the latest details to emerge is that the Shelby County mayor has issued an emergency declaration due to the strain being placed on detention facilities there. Kiran, there have been plenty of people protesting this federal presence, but not like in other cities where there are clashes between protesters and the law enforcement. Memphis leaders as well seem to be less resistant. Are they getting the most of this law enforcement push?
Memphis leaders? I don't think that there's a reason to have clashes, to be honest with you. Let's start with that. I actually look at the protests in Portland and smile in a good way, not just at what they're doing in terms of the costumes and whatnot, but like this is a pretty healthy way to protest if you are against something. That being said, I don't believe that this is a tool to be used lightly, and I don't think it's doing any good. The last time I was here, which was some time ago, we were talking about it then as well in the same context. The problem I have is that with the number of administrative warrants that were executed in terms of administrative arrests that Mayor Harris, I think, said in his press conference that counters what Governor Lee said, there doesn't seem to be a clear indication that this is doing much to help in terms of quelling any problems that they were really looking at before. I think the bigger issue here that I've had from the beginning is having a National Guard presence in American cities and essentially creating a much larger federalized National Guard that is there. It is something that I don't think we should really just be skipping over. And just because we don't have as many protests in Memphis or as much pushback does not mean that it doesn't worry me just the same.
Ian, does it help that President Trump is doing this in a red state like Tennessee where the governor is on board and not a blue state like Illinois?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. From a practical standpoint, you definitely see, just because of maybe the population, or maybe you're not getting as much vocal national pushback on the media from state leaders. Maybe the actual practice of it goes more smoothly. But I think no matter what state or what geographic context you're doing these things in, we're ultimately going to be forced to ask questions about the rationales and the legal precedent that's being set for sending troops and federalizing National Guard anywhere in the country. I think it was the September 16th memorandum from the Office of the President that said we're going to do something similar that we've done in Portland and D.C., in Memphis, Tennessee. And it's not entirely clear to me. I know they used some like metro-based crime data to show that like crime was rising or was stagnant, which was inconsistent with some of the Metro Police Memphis data. And so we really need to have clear conversations about like what the legal limits of authority are for the president doing this, no matter what the political or geographic context is. And, whose data are we using as a benchmark to make these kinds of decisions so that it's not just, executive fiat?
Beth, when President Trump started naming Memphis as a place he potentially wanted to send the National Guard, the initial things that we were hearing from Governor Bill Lee was that it wasn't needed. But now he's welcoming it and he's cooperating. Do Republican governors kind of have to go along with the White House in this kind of situation?
Well, there is a tendency to do that. You're the same political party. However, I will say, having been in politics for a long time, we have always known that Memphis has a crime problem. Okay, this is not something new. And matter of fact, I'm surprised that Governor Lee hasn't taken action before this time. So in other words, I think President Trump has called attention to it, that Memphis is a high murder rate city. And the thing is, Memphis is a beautiful place. They have so much going for them, and they've done such a good job in revitalizing parts of downtown Memphis. And if you haven't been there in a while, it's worth a visit because there's a lot of great things to see. But you can't have a city thrive if it's known as a crime capital, and Memphis has been. And so, I think it's long overdue that we do something. I'd rather see the state do it as opposed to the national government come in. That's just my personal opinion, but Memphis has welcomed arms. We want help. We want to change the reputation our city is acquiring. And on a positive note, Metro Nashville has actually seen a decline in crime, especially murder. So I think that's something we can, be proud of as a city, and we want the same thing for Memphis.
What do you make of that statement that this could last indefinitely?
Well, if you're making progress, it shouldn't have to. So I think that I feel that way about all government programs. If they're set up to address an issue and a problem, once that problem has been addressed, then we don't need to continue to do this.
Kiran, Beth just mentioned about, maybe this is something that could be better handled by the state. From your perspective, what are other options that there could be to fixing the kind of crime problems that Memphis has experienced without bringing in the National Guard?
Yeah, I obviously don't know what internal conversations have happened between Memphis government and the state government, but I would imagine that would be a great place to start. And I agree, this should not be a federal endeavor. This should be handled internally. And I don't know if anyone's gone in and said to Memphis, again, Speaker Harwell could probably speak better about this, but I don't know if anyone's gone to the leadership of Memphis and said, what do you need? What will help? What has worked in other cities without bringing in a troop presence that is, frankly, a little scary, but also maybe overburdensome? Like, what is it that you need at this point that is going to make the best strategic sense? And I don't know that those conversations have happened, at least in the last couple of years. I haven't seen much about it or reported on it, and I think that would be a great place to start. There have been crime prevention programs in other cities that have worked well. Speaker Harwell mentioned Nashville, and we've seen a decline. I have not seen a massive National Guard presence here, and so why is that? What is it that we've done that maybe has helped?
Ian, crime. Oh, excuse me. Did you have something to say?
I will say, as a side note, one of the things that could happen with the Tennessee National Guard being there, the Tennessee Guard, is it frees up the police officers to do what they can do. It puts them back out on the street as opposed to doing paperwork and traffic stops and things like that. So that's the positive that could potentially come from this.
Just depending on how you decide to allocate who does what, which it's still a little difficult to see how that is actually working out. Crime is always a campaign issue, always. Ian, what is the disconnect between kind of the campaign promise and the actual fix when these things play out?
Sure. So I won't say all, but most available polling data that I've seen of late says the public is not, at least in theory, in concept, on board with this nationalization of the Guard or of armed forces and sending them kind of from the executive at the national level down to the states. So as a purely political issue, I think the public does not like this situation, whether that, finds any purchase when they actually, go to the voting booth, either in some of our special elections coming up or nationally next year. Oh my gosh, is it almost 2026 already? Amazing.
It is.
Yeah, so it's going to be up to the politicians to either decide whether or not this is a good issue for them. Normally, talking about crime, talking about public safety can be a salient issue, but in this context where it's this strange mix of we don't exactly know who has how much authority where, and there's disagreement about how large the issue is in the first place, that could really muddy the waters and make it an important issue, but a non-issue electorally.
Well, speaking of the 2026 election, we're going to talk a little bit about that in our next segment. But we need to take a break. We'll be back with more headlines and take your calls with our panel, Kiran Sreepada, Beth Harwell, and Ian Shapiro. Join us on air at 615-760-2000 or leave your comments in the chat at youtube.com/@WPLN.org. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Wildwood Resort and Marina on Cordell Hall Lake, offering corporate and nonprofit retreats, getaways, and celebrations. 1 hour east of Nashville, year-round. More at visitwildwood.com. And Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's Daily Show, This is Nashville. Engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com. And Curry Ingram Academy, a junior kindergarten through 12 school, working to help students with learning differences reach their full potential through an individualized, structured, multisensory approach. Learn more at curryingram.org.
In October of 1970, Quebec was gripped with fear. Authorities worried that a militant separatist group had thousands of members, but it turns out...
Literally, there were, at the height of this movement, there were maybe 12 or 14 people involved.
Lessons from Quebec's October crisis, next time on The World.
This afternoon at 2 on 90.3 WPLN News.
I'm Nina Cardona, and this is Nashville. We're having a roundtable discussion about the week's news, and we'd love to hear from you. The phone number is 615-760-2000, or you can join the conversation in the chat on our video stream at youtube.com/@WPLN. The next year is going to see big changes in Tennessee politics. We'll elect a new governor. There's a special election going on now to see who will replace Republican Congressman Mark Green, and several Republican congressmen have attracted challengers. First off, let's take a look at what's happening in District 5. That's one of the districts that includes Nashville, and then it stretches to the southwest of Middle Tennessee. Right now, that seat is held by Republican Andy Ogles, who used to be mayor of Murray County. And during the pandemic, he was one of this area's loudest voices calling for people to live life normally, which meant that he butted heads quite a bit with the mayor of Columbia, Chaz Mulder, who is a Democrat. Now Mulder is running against Ogles for that congressional seat. And his message is that he's the candidate for anyone frustrated with Ogles, Republicans included. Initial campaign finance figures show Mulder outraising Ogles by a large margin, but of course the election's still a year away. Beth, you are very familiar with this district. Chaz Mulder clearly thinks there's enough Republican frustration with Ogles to potentially sway that race. Do you think that's true?
Well, I should preface my remarks by saying I have met the mayor, and he is an impressive man. And it's a real tribute to him to raise that kind of money when you're not an incumbent. So I think he'll run a viable campaign. The district leans Republican now. And I wouldn't be surprised there's some Republican opposition to Representative Ogles as well. I never underestimate the power of the incumbency. So, it will be an interesting race.
And Ogles can be a divisive figure even amongst his own party. And he does have a primary challenger that we know already, former Agriculture Commissioner Charlie Hatcher. How vulnerable do you think he is in that primary?
Well, it all depends on voter turnout, for sure. But I think that they'll run a challenging campaign, and I think I think that's good. I think it's refreshing to have people have a reason to come out and vote. We need to encourage more involvement and more voting. And the way you do this is have competitive elections.
And Kiran, you have also run for office in this area before some redistricting, so the district numbers are a little different. But regardless of the Republican primary, Mulder is clearly going ahead and running his campaign specifically against Ogles right from the start, which is not the normal way of things. Usually it's this period of just talk about myself for a while, and then once it gets down to the nitty-gritty, then you go after the other guy. What do you make about his choice to just come right out of the gate focused on Ogles?
I actually think it's a good choice. I think, I met the mayor when I was running. He's a really nice guy. This is, I think, the overwhelming kind of sentiment. And so why I'm bringing that up is that a lot of people already know him. And he's been a well-established figure, I think, in this community for a long time. I think it's smart to come out because, frankly, most of us are tired of kind of just the way races have run. And I'm not immune to this. I'm sure I did things that were like that. But I think it's great to go out and say, look, here's what I want to change. Here's what we need to do. Andy Ogles is also an easy kind of, opponent in that sense. There's a lot to talk about him. And so I think it's great. I think that he's going to be able to easily fill up the next year with everything Andy Ogles has done. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's at least one other Democrat in that primary as well, Mike Cortez, who's a city councilman. But, Mayor Mulder has come out strong, and I think he should just continue that fight.
I will jump in and say I have never met Mayor Mulder. I'm not in any of these group chats that it seems like you are all about, where he's nice and impressive. But what I will say is that he's following a trend that we see of quality challengers reading the political winds and wanting to throw their hat into the ring during a midterm cycle. I think since FDR, only in 1998 and 2002. Has the party of the president not lost massive numbers of seats. 2022 was a little bit of an outlier there, but they still lost seats on the Democratic side in the House. And so, this seems like a smart political move to, get in the race, be a quality challenger, and begin fundraising, scaring the other side, seeing how they're going to make a misstep, perhaps.
So I guess what I'm hearing from you is that this seems to be a pretty strategic choice on Mulder's part about this is the election when I'm going to go after that seat.
Yes, I think that this is someone who's relatively young and apparently nice and impressive at the same time, and they have to make choices that are going to position them best for whatever next election they want to take part in, and he's chosen this one, and for good reason, it seems.
I just want to mention that one thing. You mentioned fundraising. It is impressive. I would also say that I'm sure there's some calculation on the fact that Andy Ogles benefited from a lot of kind of PAC money that came in. They call it IE money, but basically that came in to fuel his campaign, I believe, in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, and perhaps after. So I do think that fundraising is, yes, it's impressive right now in the primary. It's probably going to be sitting there to be used to counter a lot of that if it comes to it.
Right. And since we're talking money, it should be mentioned as well that there were a lot of questions about Andy Ogles' campaign finance reports in that initial election. He did correct them at the last moment before the final deadline. But there were some overstatements of money that then were corrected. And certainly there was that, you get that impression from everything that went down with that Ogles comes from the point of view he wants to present as having the money in the race. When you look at that money, what are you seeing with such a big disparity? Beth, does anything come to mind for you?
Well, I have long felt that there's a lot of outside money that really taints the electoral process, and it's a discouraging thing to me. I mean, I'm one of those advocates of, you may call it First Amendment freedom of speech, but I, on the other hand, think that it's not. And I think the groups that come in and pour money in at the last really distort the good work of a lot of people. That's just my personal opinion. And it will more than likely happen again until we change some laws. And I think we need to. I think we need election reform.
Ian, when two candidates who are opposing each other in a race have a really public history of disagreement, which is the case here with Andy Ogles and Chaz Mulder, How do you see that playing out kind of in the psychology of the voters taking that on? Is there a risk of this becoming just too ugly too fast for the average voter?
Sure. So if these are two relatively well-known icons in this area, and they have, they've had public disagreements with one another, the public is going to see that negativity. The question is whether or not it's just going to be drowned out by things like national level negative partisanship. And at that point, things start canceling each other out, and you end up with, all things equal without, saying basically the same amount of fundraising, basically the same effectiveness of their campaigns. That would be a slight edge for Ogles just because of the distribution of partisanship in the district.
I think it's also interesting that negativity itself has shifted on that spectrum, right? Like what counted as negativity years ago is not the same today. We've whether it's social media or anything else, like we've gotten to a point where we've been desensitized a little bit, and where we have a higher tolerance for it. I think, and that may open up a small window there where you can be what we used to call negative, but it's not really as negative as we think right now.
Mm-hmm.
And people say they don't like negative campaigning, and I'm one of those. Well, on the other hand, there's a reason why they do it. Works.
Right. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean it's not effective.
Right. Exactly.
Well, if you're just tuning in, this is Nashville. I'm Nina Cardona, sitting in for Blake Farmer. Are you watching the congressional elections? Are you ready to start thinking about an election that doesn't happen until next year? Join us on air at 615-760-2000 or leave your comments in the chat at youtube.com/@WPLN, where we're streaming video. Okay, let's shift a little farther to east now. Looking at District 4 and its congressional race. This is in the area that includes Murfreesboro, Shelbyville, down almost all the way to Chattanooga. Former Rutherford County Sheriff Robert Arnold is mounting a primary challenge to the incumbent Republican Scott Desjardins, but there's a complication. Arnold is a convicted felon. He's pleaded guilty to running a company that basically profited off his position as sheriff, selling e-cigarettes to the people who were held in jail there. He served his time, but he lost the right to vote. And under the disenfranchisement rules in Tennessee, the kind of crime he committed means his ability to vote cannot be restored. So there's a lot to unpack with this situation. First of all, Ian, in this political moment, what do you think voter reaction will be to Arnold's criminal history?
So this is interesting. I think a lot of individuals who fashion themselves Republicans, I think is what they're called now. I think a lot of them will stick with him, especially if he's able to, maybe he would make this into a campaign issue, make it about, victimization. Institutions have wronged me in some way, shape, or form. However, it's not necessarily a sure thing if that type of dynamic and that framing of his personal situation is going to help things roll off his back the same way that they may have helped maybe President Trump in the past. So he can try it, and I would be interested from an empirical standpoint to see if it works and if it keeps his otherwise pretty stable Republican base together. But that remains to be seen.
Beth, the state Republican Party has several rules about who can be a candidate in their primaries. Mm-hmm. One of them is that you have to be registered to vote. Mm-hmm. So just to run in the primary, Arnold will need a special dispensation from GOP leaders. Do you think he has much of a chance of getting that?
No, I do not. And Scott Desjardins has done a good job of working his constituency, and he's strong. And I don't think the Republican Executive Committee will take lightly someone having convicted a felon.
Kiran, does the Democratic Party have any similar rules in place as far as you know?
As far as I know, I don't know. I do think that's important, and I'll be looking into it after the show. But I also don't know of any candidates who have strongly declared in that district. Doesn't mean they're not there. So I'm not 100% sure. I think that when you look at the field, at least in District 4, with the two Republican candidates who are there, there's, again, plenty to go around in terms of their own histories. That's a problem. I think the interesting thing about the sheriff is that, as Dr. Shapiro was saying, there's probably a desire to work that angle of they went after Trump and they're going after me. I think he's actually said that already. Trump didn't plead guilty as so readily as he did. So there's already an issue of you admitted to this, you've done it, and you've served your time, yes, but it's there. It's not, anything that's up for discussion, at least.
Well, let's turn to District 7. Primary voters choose Republican they chose Republican Matt Van Epps and Democrat Afton Bain last week in the primary. Van Epps touts his credentials from the military. He's running on a platform mirroring the priorities of the Trump administration. Let's take a listen.
Today, I want to talk about our Second Amendment. I am a staunch supporter and defender of our Second Amendment rights. We would not have the First Amendment if we didn't have the Second. Today, I want to talk about energy and our nuclear capabilities and opportunities in Tennessee and how that relates to our nuclear and national security strategy. Healthcare and rural healthcare are really, really important issues to me, and there's a lot of work that we need to do. I think there are two broad ways that we should approach this problem. One is through price transparency. We need to work really hard to ensure that we know what costs are for medical procedures and for prescriptions. Today, I want to talk about law enforcement. I am a staunch supporter of our law enforcement. Today, I want to talk about border security. President Trump and Chairman Mark Green worked really hard to secure our southern border.
Okay, so that's a collection of comments, obviously, through the campaign of Republican Matt Van Epps, who won the primary from the Republican Party last week in the special election for District 7's congressional seat. His opponent, the Democratic nominee as of last week, is Afton Bain, who touts her credentials as a pissed-off social worker working against corporate and moneyed interests. And we have a recent social media post from her.
Now I'm running for Congress because Tennessee deserves leaders who will put people first, and this country deserves bold and fearless leadership that can meet this moment. As a state representative in Tennessee, I have fought to eliminate Tennessee's grocery tax. In Congress, I will fight to make sure your rural hospitals and nursing homes stay open, and I will make sure that no one loses their health care because they can't afford it. This is a wake-up call. If we don't bring change to Congress, the billionaires and bought-out politicians will continue to rig the system against us. This will be the first federal special election since the bill passed. Let's show the entire country that in deep red Tennessee, we will not stand for a system that is rigged against us. I'm Afton Bain, and I'm running for Congress.
Okay, two very different styles, two very different platforms. Beth, at this point in the general election, what does a candidate need to do to energize their base, but also appeal to voters at large? I mean, which of these kind of approaches do you think would resonate the most?
Well, I think Van Epps is hitting the talking points that this district would resonate in this district. I admire anybody that runs for office. It's a difficult thing to do. So I respect the fact that we have two candidates. Again, anytime you have candidates, you have a reason to go to the polls and vote. And this district leans Republican, as evidenced in that Republican primary. And with President Trump's endorsement, you saw what it did in that primary.
Kiran, which platform seems better positioned to energize those undecided or swing voters in a race like District 7?
Well, that's a bit unfair since I ran as a Democratic candidate. But look, I think that Afton is in a better position. I think that Representative Bain has proven herself as a pretty well-equipped and knowledgeable organizer. She knows how to get out there. She knows how to reach voters. She's running on a platform that seems to be resonating with a lot of Democrats in the style of Zohran Mamdani and others who are really talking about the wealth inequalities and income inequalities and all of the issues that have come from the big, beautiful bill. I also think she's probably really understands that there were significant shifts in some of the special elections that happened following the 2024 election. And in Florida, I believe there was a massive shift. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was in the double digits. And so there's a lot there. I think that she is speaking the language that many Democrats want to see in order to show up at the polls. I want to see and show up at the polls. So I think she's putting a strong case out there. I think she's got a strong shot, and I think she's a great candidate.
District 7 is gerrymandered. The past two elections for the seat saw a 60-40 split in favor of the Republicans. In this kind of situation, does the platform even matter?
So I think both candidates are doing a fascinating thing right now. They're keeping particulars on District 7, the local, but they're both nationalizing the election in distinct ways. So if you go to Van Epps' website, Van Epps for Congress, the first thing that you see is not Van Epps, but a big picture of Donald Trump, followed by a number of endorsements from national Republican leaders. That's one way of nationalizing this more local race. If you go to Afton Bain's website, you see another kind of of nationalization, pulling on this economic populist message, this kind of anti-establishment, and I'm young, I'm the new generation, I have energy, which is in demand right now with the Democratic base. All of that has the potential to nationalize the election. And even if the facts on the ground are that you have, roughly 60% Republican, roughly 40% Democrat in the district, you may be nationalizing it to the point that really that 40-60 doesn't matter. And it's, what D plus 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on election day a year from now is going to look like.
Yeah, and to follow up on what's been said, both of these candidates came out of, I think, highly competitive primaries. And so it was really a tribute to her that she won against Bo Mitchell, who had a great name base. And same with Van Epps. He ran against some really credible candidates. So, people want a choice, they've got a choice.
And I'd be happy to be fact-checked on this, but I was looking at kind of just the raw numbers. And even if there is kind of this 60 Republican, 40 Democratic split, it looked like they both roughly were within 1,000 votes of one another for like the raw Democrats turning out to the primary and Republicans turning out to the primary, which was fascinating.
Well, and turnout, I think anytime you talk about a special election, anytime you talk about an election, turnout is such a big matter. Mm-hmm. But when it's a special election in an odd year, people are a December election. This is not just an odd year. It's a time of year we're not used to coming out of the polls. Turnout becomes everything. I see a lot of nodding heads here. It just seems like that is where the race is. And, I'll just make this one comment on my own part. When I look at that district and I see how very different the western part of the district there by the Tennessee River is from the part that's in Nashville, how do you run on anything other than national issues? Because the local issues are going to be so different from one end of the district to the other, it seems. Well,
I think that's right. But nationalizing an election also does, at least for Democrats, I think, bring about something else that we need, which is, over the years of getting hit again and again and again, it is nice to have something to be excited about. It is nice to have, for Tennessee Democrats, I think, just look at something and say, I like the candidate. I am there. I'm voting for them. I'm not just voting against something. All of that is there to at least energize a population. And, even if there's no victory, there is value, I think, in saying, look, maybe our candidate lost, but we're still here. And you still have to understand that you all represent us and you all are carrying forward our wishes and hopes and dreams. And so I think there's some virtue there in sort of nationalizing the election, at least for the Democrats that live in the state.
And on the Democratic side of the election, it's not huge in magnitude, but you see that Afton Bain has a small but growing social media presence. She's getting some national pickup from social media activists. I'm thinking of political activists and former lawyer Rachel Cohen, who has been on some television shows making her case. So who knows to what extent this is going to become nationalized, either in their rhetoric or maybe money down the line.
Well, you asked for a fact check, and we've got it from the control room. Republicans, there were 36,854 ballots cast in the Republican primary. For Democrats, it was 31,002. So just about 5,000 different, more like 4,000 and some change different between the two.
Thank you.
It's hard enough to run, by the way, every 2 years. I just also realized that whoever the winner is just going to have to turn right around and run again in 2026.
Yeah. That's very true. Well, we need to take a break just like that. Candidate will need to as well. We'll be back with more headlines and take your calls with our panel, Ian Shapiro, Kiran Sreepada, and Beth Harwell. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners. And Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, celebrating our local community. Information on reduced admission rates for Davidson and bordering county residents of all ages at countrymusichallaffame.org. And Tennessee State Parks, with a variety of getaway accommodations, including cabins and lodges. Guests can experience the great outdoors without giving up modern amenities. Learn more at tnstateparks.com. And the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Vanderbilt University, offering intellectual courses for adults over 50. Learn more about the wide-ranging topics and full curriculum at vanderbilt.edu/OLLI.
Have you heard? The Best of Nashville includes a couple of WPLN news specials named by the editors of the Nashville scene. Our podcast, The Country in Our Hearts, is named Best Audio Storytelling, and the This Is Nashville series, In My Place, is Best News Podcast. We're honored for the recognition and proud of these works. Check them out on our website, WPLN.org, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Nina Cardona, and this is Nashville. So far on today's Roundtable, we've talked about the explosion in Bucksnort, the federal law enforcement surge in Memphis, and several congressional races. We're also due to pick a new governor in next year's election. Bill Lee is term limited, so he cannot run again. Let us know what you're thinking about the governor's race and the news of the week. Join us on air at 615-760-2000 or leave your comments in the chat at youtube.com/@WPLN, where we're streaming video. Beth, you ran in the 2018 Tennessee Republican gubernatorial primary. The field isn't quite as crowded for the 2026 primary, but there are a few so far. Senator Marsha Blackburn and Congressman John Rose being the most recognizable names. Are you endorsing anyone yet?
No, I'm not. And but I will say that I think we're lucky to have two good candidates. And as I said kind of on our break, I'd like to see the Democratic Party field a candidate too. I mean, Tennessee has had a long, rich history of electing people to the governor's office that come out of the business world primarily and really have good managerial skills, because being a governor is largely an administrative position. And so, it'll be interesting to see how this race turns.
Well, on the Democratic side, a few people have announced an intention to run for governor, but none of them are those kind of major figures with the name recognition like Blackburn or Rose. Ian and Kiran, I'd like to hear from both of you. Do you anticipate any major action in the primary?
So I'll go first, and I'll go ahead and say I'm also at this time not endorsing any candidate for office, not that it would hold much weight. But in the same vein as we talked about Mayor Mulder, as the year creeps closer to an end and you don't see any high quality challengers, so someone who is well connected to their community and kind of the state as a whole, or currently holds a public office, throwing their hat into the ring, it just becomes vanishingly likely that you're going to get someone who puts up a fight in 2026.
Kiran?
Yeah, you stole my joke about my endorsement mattering, but it's fine. No, I mean, look, Jerry Green out of Memphis has announced for the governor's race. We still don't have a Senate candidate or that I know of, but I can say this, she's run a couple times. She's on city council there, I believe, but she is a really fierce candidate. She's doing a lot of great groundwork. She goes out. I agree with Dr. Shapiro. I mean, I don't know what that primary field's going to look like as you go to the, closer and closer to the election. I also think there's probably some element of what does the District 7 election look like in December to understand if there are shifts or if there are some sort of impacts there, and how much, and that might also motivate other candidates to get in the race. Personally, I wish they would already get in the race, just because I think if you really want to change things, if you really have that passion, you should. I understand there's a lot of, fear about getting into a race you might lose, but didn't stop me. It shouldn't stop them.
Well, when do you think is kind of like that point of no return? Like, you have to have announced by this point. How long can somebody really wait for a statewide campaign like governor if they're trying to wait to see something like this special election? Like, when do you need to announce?
So just as I stole his joke, Kiran stole my analysis that they're going to be watching that 7th special election. Anyone who is strategically placing themselves to be successful in a campaign, ideally to win, but at the very worst, claim a statewide kind of national foothold in this time where people have a demand for strong leadership on the Democratic side when they would otherwise feel despair. Yeah, I'm sure a few weeks after that election, if you don't see anyone throw their hat into the ring, you probably won't find anyone good willing to.
Do you think we can expect many more names coming on the Republican side, or when you have such name recognition as Blackburn and then a congressman, a sitting member of Congress, does that kind of make a lot of people say, oh, maybe I'll wait till next time?
I think it does.
Yeah. Now, Beth, you represented part of Nashville in the state legislature. And at the time that you were speaker, that's from 2011 to 2019, Nashville had 3 mayors during that period.
Right.
Carl Dean, Megan Barry, David Briley. What was your relationship like between the mayors and Metro with the state government?
Well, I always tried to have a good working relationship with local government, and I think that's important, representing Nashville like I did. I was probably closest to Carl Dean. I knew him personally, and our kids were in school together. And I think, we've had some good mayors that have worked hard. And I like to see that relationship of the state and the city working well together.
Ian, any advice for Mayor O'Connell on how he can best maintain a positive working relationship with the current speaker and the legislature?
Yeah. So, all politics is local, all politics is personnel situation. So Mayor Freddie, who I have accidentally met once, crossing actually on this show before, he was very kind. He was laser focused on getting results. And when you're an executive trying to work at both the local and with a state legislature, you need to have as many interpersonal conversations and relationships being built. And from what I have seen, he tends to keep his finger on the pulse of the state legislature. And so, just keep talking to people. Don't hide.
On the flip side of that, Kiran, what kind of approach are you hoping to see the next governor take in terms of the state's relationship with cities like Nashville and Memphis? Because it has been somewhat antagonistic in the last few years.
Yeah, look, I think they should work better together. There shouldn't be this fiat of like, look, if you don't do this, I'm going to just, using state authority, overtake you and overrule you. Which we've seen in Memphis and in Nashville. And so I think a much more collaborative relationship is necessary. I think if you don't want to piss off people who live in those areas, it's probably the best thing to do. I think there's been a tendency of saying, well, we're in power, so it doesn't matter. I don't really think that's the best way to go, but I'm also not in their position. And so that's their decision. It just depends on who's going to come through this. In the optimistic side, if there's a Democratic governor, I'm hoping that there is actually some sort of a better relationship that at least we've seen in the past. If it ends up being Senator Blackburn or Congressman Rose, I don't know Congressman Rose's approach to that, but Senator Blackburn has not given me much to be optimistic about in that sense.
Well, another round of No King demonstrations are scheduled for this weekend. The first protest was held back in June as a kind of counter-programming to President Trump's military parade in Washington, D.C. And that time, the folks who came out in Nashville were energized by their frustration with something that had happened here shortly before, which was a weekend blitz of traffic stops targeting people in the country illegally. About 200 folks were detained or deported as a result. That was before the June protest. So now the same organizers are calling for another national day of demonstrations, and this time it is happening while the law enforcement surge is happening in Memphis. Kiran, what kind of focus do you anticipate the local demonstrations will have? Like, where's that energy right now?
Actually, I think it's everywhere. It's broader than just the law enforcement aspect. I think that is, what happens to be the issue of the week right now. It's a ongoing issue. But the point is that there is so much that I think people who are showing up are angry about, myself included. And I think that there's a variety of issues. And it's not just the law enforcement aspect. We've talked about this before in terms of candidate strategy. It's the economics of things. It's how difficult it is to actually afford not just to live in Nashville, just generally to live anywhere now in terms of the cost of living and where wages are at. So I think there's a lot of focus that's going to be, yes, on, for instance, things like the law enforcement aspect, still issues of the immigration raids and the ICE deportations, but also it will be an ongoing thing. If you sign up for one of these rallies, for instance, you'll even see, bring your own sign. A lot of diversity of opinion is going to be, showing up there in terms of what you want to put on that sign.
And one of the big differences between now and June is that there have been several deaths related to politics. Charlie Kirk, of course, shot and killed in an event in Utah. Minnesota House Speaker, a Democrat, murdered as well. People have lost their jobs for social media posts about Kirk's death. Ian, how do you think that affects people's interest in showing up and participating in something like a big protest?
So there's two ways to look at it. One way is to think of it as just one more issue that is really important to another subset of people. So protests, they get big when they are focal points, when they present an opportunity for individuals to project whatever their personally most important issue is. A lot of people are going to be turning out for this protest because of the current government shutdown. It turns out shutdowns do not hit all segments and all political priorities equally. This one is particularly hitting and furloughing employees at places like the EPA, the Department of Education, all places that you tend to think of as Democratic Party priorities, right? Just reinforcing and giving another constituency within the umbrella of that party a reason to turn out and show up, right? The protest might be framed as, something that is broadly about, police or National Guard in cities, but it's hard to say what any particular person is going to these things for. But the size of them is going to reflect the number of different issues that are important to different constituencies in the United States.
And one last question on this, just Beth, from the perspective of a state official, when you see a big protest like this, what kind of lens do you take that through to interpret what you're seeing?
Well, I always encourage people to participate in the political process. But I will say that, do I think these protests are extremely effective? I do not. I will tell you, in my years of service, the one thing that always hits an elected official is to receive an email that says, I am a registered voter in your district. So at the end of the day, people care. If you care enough to write or talk to an elected official about an issue, you definitely care about that issue. And when it gets just mass protest, I think elected officials just shrug it off, to be honest with you.
So maybe instead of having a No King sign, it should have their area code on it.
Well, Blake Farmer always likes to end these roundabouts with what he calls a smile story from the recent news. I'm going to cheat a little this week, share something from history that I was really pleased to recently learn while I was preparing for an episode of the Nashville Ledger podcast, which is that in 1919, I think this is so surprising and cool, there opened in Clarksville a bank that was completely owned, operated, run by women. First women's bank, before women had the right to vote. And it was successful. In their first day, Clarksville citizens, both men and women, brought $200,000 in deposits to that bank. I just think that was so cool. What smile stories do you have?
Well, that story, thank you. I did not know that piece of history, so that did make me smile. The thing that crossed my mind as I was here today, I guest lecture every now and then at MTSU, and on Constitution Day, I was a guest there on campus, and the students across the whole campus, every department, the students attended, and they read aloud the Constitution. Mm. And I thought, not many students graduate from our colleges can say, we read the Constitution. But that happened on MTSU, and it made me smile.
What about you, Kiran?
There's been a couple things. First of all, Dolly telling us all that she's fine.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think everybody can agree across the political spectrum on that.
Yeah, I in the political world, I've enjoyed Mark Maron's mic drop as he left his podcast, and I always love Zoran Mamdani's social media feed and how he responds to criticism. But on a more serious note, I think the thing that at least did make me smile, it kind of just warmed my heart a little, is the community reaction after the plant explosion in Bucksnort. It's Dr. Shapiro brought this up earlier in terms of how information has come through. It has been really great to see people get beyond what the algorithms are feeding them in terms of stories and opinions, and actually just get out and again see we've got neighbors that were involved in this. We've got friends, we've got family, and a community coming together, and just the broad support from elsewhere in the state and the country.
And a little less than a minute, Ian, what's yours?
Yeah, not to sound too much like a commercial, but in the magical land of California, the LA Times did a glowing profile of my personal favorite streaming service, Dropout.tv. It's about improvisers, and it's good times and good vibes. Check it out.
I heartily endorse that, since we were talking about endorsements. Well, thank you guys for joining me so much. Beth Harwell is former Speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives. Kiran Sreepada is former Director for the States Project. Ian Shapiro, a political science professor at Tennessee State University. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thanks for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. If you missed yesterday's episode, we talked about local spiders. We debunked some myths, even had a brown recluse in the studio. You can catch up in the podcast feed or at thisisnashville.org. You can also ask a smart speaker to play the latest episode of This Is Nashville. Today's episode was produced by Mary Mancini. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley, who is also our board operator for the day. Josh Deepen was answering the phones. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. And the conversation doesn't end here. You can comment and tell us what you want to hear on the show by email at thisisnashville@wpln.org. Also find us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and X at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Nina Cardona. Let's make this day a great one.
Harpeth Hall, working to make ambitions become achievements and to help girls become purposeful young women prepared to make meaningful contributions to the world. Sunday, November 2nd, Harpeth Hall will host an admission preview day for girls and their families, featuring student-led tours, premier programs details, and an opportunity to meet faculty and coaches. More at harpethhall.org/admission. Harpeth Hall, where girls in grades 5 through 12 learn to think critically, lead confidently, and live honorably.
WPLN,
Nashville Public Radio,
and 91.7 WHRS Cookeville.
Nashville's home for Morning Edition and NPR News.
WPLN.org is where you can find more from WPLN News, including the Nash Villager, your human-powered newsletter and podcast, exploring Nashville news and history. Subscribe to both at WPLN.org.
Funding for Here and Now comes from MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software, accelerating the pace of engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com.
From NPR and WBUR Boston, I'm Robin Young.
And I'm Scott Tong. This is Here and Now. Coming up, a voice from Chicago's Southeast Side neighborhood, where federal agents deployed Black Hawk helicopters and tear gas in their immigration crackdown.
Machine guns on the Southeast Side. This is ridiculous.